Let's talk a little bit about moving RRI forward. So what we're going to talk a little bit about tonight is kind of how we've evolved over the last 7 or 8 years, how we're advancing our mission, and again, we'll deal with some of the political issues and dynamics that are present in the amateur radio community. We won't dwell too much on that, and hopefully, you'll find some of this interesting. For those of you that aren't really familiar with RRI, we were formed in 2016, largely in response to two events. One of which was the federal Cascadia Rising disaster exercise, and the second was, quite frankly, in response to some politics involving our friends at the ARRL, which I won't go into too deeply because it's, let's call it, we would be exhuming corpses here at this point. But generally speaking, RRI was designed to be very mission-oriented, professional, and preferably non-political. And what had happened with the Cascadia Rising exercise was that the director of FEMA had asked that NTS assets be tested. So a group of operators who basically formed the core of the original RRI founders, we put together worked with them to put together a prototype national response plan. And then we created an evaluation process to test that national response plan, as well as operator performance. And RRI performed so well that the ARRL's response, at least of the executive committee in Newington, was to decapitate the entire national leadership of the national traffic system. So we decided, after years of dealing with this, it was time to build an organization whose job it was to enhance and modernize the former national traffic system. It's very important to say that we weren't created as an anti-ARRL organization. What we basically did is we identified a vacuum in terms of leadership, vision, funding, et cetera, and we felt that the time had come to basically enhance and modernize the system, because we felt it still had value, not just as a training asset, but quite frankly as a potential emergency response asset, as had been proven by the ability of traffic operators during that federal exercise. So over the years, we've pretty much invested a tremendous amount of time in creating a work product that has, in many respects, very successfully enhanced the NTS. And we've developed many relationships with other organizations that have worked with us along these goals, including the WinLink development team and various other agencies, Army Mars personnel, and the like. And only recently we've again encountered some resistance from the ARRL. You may have heard of the NTS 2.0 initiative. We have not been involved in that in any way. They haven't collaborated with us in any way. And in recent months, they have promulgated standards and procedures that are contrary to programs that RRI had already developed and thoroughly tested. And in many respects, it appears that these standards were really designed to utilize the league's hegemonic influence to marginalize RRI. So, as a matter of fact, in various presentations, the ARRL director, who is leading up this process, has clearly and unequivocally stated that, quote, "There cannot be two traffic handling agencies." So, once again, we did everything we could to avoid politics, be constructive and collegial and cooperative, and of course, politics managed to find us a little bit. That having been said, there's a lot of good news. RRI basically has discovered over the last 7 years that many organizations and agencies are looking for what you might call solutions agile solutions to various MCOM problems. So we've seen tremendous growth in areas that we didn't really expect when we first formed RRI, one of which was the development of quality peer-reviewed training classes, the development of various innovative emergency communications programs and solutions, and the implementation of various emergency communications exercises, both internal and external. And of course, during this period of 7 years, we've responded to some disaster operations quite successfully. And so, as a result, regardless of what happens in Newington, what we've discovered is that, the vast majority of MCOM organizations, RRIs groups, OXCOM groups, and so on, they are working with us, and we have an excellent working relationship. And that's really what matters, quite frankly, is these grassroots relationships. So, for example, just a few hours ago, OXCOM USA and RRI released a joint press release announcing a memorandum of agreement to cooperate in various areas. So, in reality, the politics is kind of insignificant because RRI is seeing great success in various areas, because what we're doing is we're, in a collegial manner and a symbiotic manner, we're working with various organizations to solve their problems. So we still support NTS. We were founded as an association of nets. We were founded to provide infrastructure and support for the national traffic system. In the past 7 years or so, we've engaged in a fair amount of modernization. For example, we developed procedures and formats for transmitting radiogram ICS 213 messages, which have been a long-standing need for the MCOM community. We worked with the WinLink development team to develop forms libraries, interactive forms that walk inexperienced operators through the process of formatting a correct, serviced, interoperable radiogram ICS 213 or standard radiogram message. And we've engaged in a wide variety of interoperability exercises with outside organizations and agencies to test these concepts and these programs. So we continue to provide support for NTS. We continue to modernize NTS. And what we've really found is that generally speaking, the MCOM community and the NTS community, they just want solutions. They don't really care about the politics in Newington. They really don't care about some of the petty things that arise in the amateur radio service. So our attitude is always stay positive, stay focused on mission success, and stay as far away from politics as we can. And the results have been really actually quite surprising and pleasing overall. So a good example is a program that we recently developed called the I Am Safe program. For example, the Seattle area communications hubs, which is an emergency communications organization in Washington State, primarily in the Seattle area, contacted us with a problem. They wanted to develop a systematic approach to not only deploying message centers in the aftermath of, say, a major earthquake and tsunami, but they wanted to have a process to manage health and welfare originations after a catastrophic event. This program is now kind of migrating to other areas. For example, we've been working with amateur radio organizations in Puerto Rico to roll this program out and better enhance their ability to respond to a major hurricane, such as Hurricane Maria. So, for example, during Hurricane Maria, one RRI registered radio operator alone, just one operator, handled over 2,000 messages out of Puerto Rico. I actually received calls from the Red Cross while I was driving down I-55 in Illinois asking me to transmit messages to Puerto Rico. And I did it operating CW Mobile on one of our 20-meter watch frequency and so on. So we've actually, seen the need for the ability to implement a program like this. And when the Seattle organizations came to us with a request for assistance, they approached us because they felt that we were agile, and they recognized that we kind of take an applications engineering approach to creating problems and creating solutions for problems that are present in the field for various MCOM organizations. Is Steve Hansen here on the call tonight? Steve Hansen, are you here by chance?
Yes, he is.
Okay, Steve, if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to have you kind of explain a bit of the process behind the I Am Safe program. Steve Hansen is our affiliated programs manager, and he's a member of our emergency communications committee, and he is kind of a key player in managing our relationships with other agencies, be it Army Mars or the Seattle organization, Oxcom USA, whoever we're going to work with. Steve would be that person. So Steve, if you'd like to give us a little background here, since you were the lead on this project, I'll let you say a few words. Did he disappear on me, perhaps?
Well, he doesn't have video, it doesn't look like.
Yeah, maybe he's off doing something else. So I'll manage.
And he's muted as well.
Yeah. So essentially, what we looked at is, what would happen if you had to set up multiple message centers in an area that's been devastated. So if you again, going back to say Cascadia Rising, well, what would happen if there's that major tsunami and that devastating earthquake, and there's communications outages? The Seattle emergency management agencies and their associated Oxcom organizations developed a plan to deploy message centers in the Seattle metropolitan area. In that process, one of the tasks would be managing health and welfare traffic, the assumption being the cellular grid would be down and so forth. And when we looked at this problem, we did not want to focus entirely or exclusively on the amateur radio service or one network organization. So for example, we have WinLink available, we have RRI available, right? And between these two organizations, there's a number of ways that you can transmit health and welfare messages. You can send an email, via the cellular carriers that appears as an email or text message. So WinLink's capable of doing that. Likewise, you can send a radiogram message that would be handled generally manually. And so what would be the determining factor based on which of these services you use? And the determining factor would ultimately be whether or not the person knows the cell carrier and number of the recipient for the health and welfare message, or whether or not they may just have an address, a city, or a phone number. And so essentially, the way this is designed is that within the message center, there are essentially clerks. They need not be radio amateurs who would present forms. People complete them. They provide all the remote contact information that they might have available. And then this is routed to one of these two networks, either the digital traffic network, for example, or to WinLink. Another aspect of this that we're in the process of developing, and I believe it was discussed in a presentation short time ago, a week or so ago, it came up, is the process of developing an interface associated with our webpage that would automate the cellular carrier lookup process in the event of an emergency, so that we wouldn't have to, say somebody comes, they have a phone number, they wouldn't necessarily have to know the carrier, because let's face it, if I were to poll everybody on this group and ask them who, their relative cellular carrier is, they probably couldn't answer it, right? Especially somebody maybe that lives on the other side of the country. So this whole process here is an example of how RRI worked with other agencies, the American Red Cross, the Seattle Emergency Communications Hubs, and so on, to develop an integrated process that isn't focused on trying to squeeze an emergency communications process into a single box, but rather is focused on utilizing the emergency communications resource that's best suited to the task at hand. So our focus in this case is the mission success, not necessarily the utilizing just a single program, because that's maybe a perceived interest of RRI or some other organization. You can read about this on our webpage, and we can go more in depth into it. But we also are in the process of translating the documents and procedures and so forth into Spanish, so that they can be used in Puerto Rico or in other Spanish-speaking countries, say here in the Western Hemisphere. So we're in the process of developing programs such as this for what you might call customers. And the traffic system may be an element in this, but what we found is that, the program development is an area that's desperately needed within the amateur radio community. Other things that we've done in the past, and we've kind of touched on this, I think, in prior presentations, but for example, the development of the radiogram text creators. So generally speaking, RRI has two types of messages, one of which is the standard radiogram, and the second of which is the radiogram ICS 213 message. So when you go about designing a process for the transmission of, say, an ICS 213 via a given radio network, it's a little bit like traffic engineering. By that I mean infrastructure, Department of Transportation traffic engineering. Do we have any traffic engineers on the call tonight? Okay, I'm not a traffic engineer, but in many respects, traffic engineers are presented with a very difficult problem. They kind of have to engage in witchcraft to try and imagine how drivers will respond to different road structures and and layouts of highway infrastructure and so on. But once they design it, drivers will generally try and game the system to their advantage. And you find yourself trying to guess how people are going to operate based on a given set of data. Then you turn around and you find out that once you create this new framework, individuals act in their own interest, and they will try and bypass that system to gain a perceived advantage. Well, when you deal with radio amateurs, you have to be realistic about how they already communicate. You have to be realistic about the procedures that they already have, and you have to be realistic about how they perceive the world and their operational environment. So when we went about, for example, adding the ICS 213 message to the traffic system, we looked at the reality that many people who are involved in the traffic handling world, they already had strong familiarity with the radiogram. And we had to create a methodology through which you could transmit a radiogram ICS 213 message and have it generally move through the move through the network fairly seamlessly. So for example, if you greatly alter the framework and the procedures and the format of the message, by, for example, adding extraneous information and so forth, it almost results in a form of cognitive dissonance. So RRI went to RRIs groups all over the country. We solicited samples of how they managed this problem. We identified the best practices amongst the MCOM community at the local level. And then we juxtaposed that, the best examples from the local level, with the operational environment that traffic operators are used to. And we developed a process that was quite seamless and turned out to be quite efficient. And then we, as a parallel process, we worked with the WinLink development team to create not just a radiogram text creator, but a radiogram ICS 213 text creator that can walk an inexperienced operator through the creation of a properly formatted and serviced radiogram. The idea being that, number one, the average traffic operator who may not be intimately familiar with unique ICS 213 message formats should be able to generally handle the message just as he would any standard radiogram. And number two, in time of emergency, we're going to have a lot of people who maybe don't understand message formats and procedures. And this WinLink text creator can walk them through the process of creating a properly serviced radiogram or radiogram ICS 213 message. So anytime you go to create something, you have to look at the existing environment, and you have to try and make things. I'm trying to find the best way to express this, but you have to find a way to develop a methodology that allows that doesn't create this kind of cognitive dissonance, you might say, in the volunteers and staff that are going to be processing the messages. So when we developed the radiogram ICS 213 policies and procedures, the ICS 213 goes in according to certain requirements. It essentially is translated in a very convenient way into a standard radiogram, passes through the system seamlessly and interoperably, and it comes out the other side, and it's reconverted into the proper ICS 213 format. The individual operators and nets that handle that radiogram ICS 213 don't really note much of a difference. Some additional address information, some additional signature information, but the basic process remains the same. So it's a little bit like, again, the DOT engineer trying to design a highway system. You have to manage the people, the training, the years of experience, and the, quote, way we've always done it. So the procedures allow for seamless interoperability and message transfer. And then there's these parallel programs, which we worked on with the WinLink development team to allow inexperienced operators to create a properly constructed and serviced radiogram text creator. If you put in something that's not allowed, the software will tell you. And then we created a mechanism through which the traffic is automatically routed via WinLink to a region gateway. And then from the region gateway, it's transferred into the traffic system to expedite last mile routing and delivery. So you can see there's several steps involved here, right? You have to develop policies and procedures based on operational environment, existing standards. You have to go ahead and deal with the operators who maybe aren't experienced in message handling. You have to have a technological solution, that is the message transfer process between WinLink and RRI networks. And then, of course, you have to promulgate standards and the like. So this is kind of gives you an idea of what we've found in the last 7 or 8 years as we developed these programs, the radiogram template, the automated processes, and things of this nature. So by the way, I've had like a 16-hour workday, so if I sound a little, what would you say, uh, you know, not my usual quick-witted self. I apologize. But the other thing that we did is, we obviously wanted to add professionalism to the traffic system, and this meant new fillable radiogram forms, uh, uh, basically, encouraging new standards for radiogram delivery, uh, allowing for different methods for delivering radiograms, text message, email delivery, etc. These are all problems that we worked on going forward. So the other thing too is that once you create something, a program, policies, procedures, technological solutions, they have to be thoroughly tested. So as an example, we've been running tests on the I Am Safe program. We've run a couple of exercises on that already. For a couple of years now, we've been testing the radiogram ICS 213 messaging process with Army Mars Region 2 assets. So this allows us to test the fillable message forms. It allows us to test the message propagation process through the networks and how that's managed. It allows us to test the delivery process and so forth. And it's been vetted now for, gosh, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years. I'd have to ask Steve, how long that's been going on. But the idea here is that, if you build a solution, you have to thoroughly test the solution. Now, and that was an interesting aside when this NTS 2.0 committee was created. Despite the fact that we already had all these policies, procedures, et cetera, in place, they decided to create their own solution. Okay, which of course is highly disruptive. Fortunately, I don't think anybody in the traffic community is really buying into it. But you don't want to go about it that way. You have to be collegial. You have to develop symbiotic relationships. You have to include all those that are involved as stakeholders in the process. And I think foremost, if you have a proven, reliable standards that's been vetted over a period of a couple of years through, weekly exercises and so forth, you don't go ahead and try and change it. So the RRI policy is we have a proven program for our radiogram ICS 213 messages. It's been thoroughly tested. It's been used by various OXCOM groups throughout the country. We've tested it with the Army Mars personnel. We're not going to change our standards and policies in response to political pressure. We have a proven product that works, and we're simply going to stick with it.
Jim,
yeah.
Can I jump in? I think I got my mic working now.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
But everything you said is fine.
Yeah, so how long have we been doing the Army Mars test with the radiogram ICS 213 messages?
We started that at toward the end of 2020. So we're going into what would be fourth year. And we're doing, it's been a mix of WinLink, and some of the traffic has come through the digital traffic network, and some has been distributed from my station to the participants around Maine through the traffic system, the primarily voice nets up here.
Okay, great. Yeah. So again, this illustrates the importance as radio amateurs. Let's look at this philosophically. This really illustrates the importance that, first seek, first to understand, then be understood. Number two, you want to find ways, always try and find ways to cooperate and work in a collegial manner with the various organizations that are playing in the sandbox, the various MCOM organizations, OXCOM and Mars and RRIs and so forth. And that's the procedure to take. And Steve, I kind of called on you earlier while you were working out your mic problems, just, to review, kind of give a summary of, because you can do it a little better than I can, on how the Seattle community emergency hubs process began and how it was implemented.
Okay, I'll try to do it really quickly. First of all, Seattle Hubs is not it's not a agency. It's a group of people that have formed an organization, a citizens organization for assisting people in the community that might be displaced by a disaster. But the basic process is that they have, I think it's 50 some gathering sites or hubs around the Seattle area, Seattle and Tacoma. And when people go there, one of the things that can be provided, besides things like other food, directing people to the appropriate services and so forth, is communications. And the way it started was the ARRL set back in, actually it was Field Day about a year and a half ago. And these strange messages were coming out of Seattle to various destinations with incomplete addresses and so forth, and basically explaining this was an exercise and so forth. So I contacted them, and that's where the program started, because they were clearly they had an idea that the radiogram might be a good option if there were ambiguous addresses, which you can't do by email, for example. And the traffic handlers can generally cope with that as long as the message gets near to the destination point. So we started a program to formalize the process, and what it consists of right now, as I think Jim explained, is a person shows up at an intake station. They're presented with a form, and the form has all of the information that can be provided for the addressee of the message. So it could start with email, address, cell phone with carrier at the present, although as Jim noted, we're trying to get rid of the need to know the carrier, mailing address, telephone, landline telephone number, etc. And then realizing that people in this situation might be under a bit of stress, there are 14 shortened messages that can be applied. So the person is asked to pick up to 3 of these short messages. They range from "I'm safe" to "I'm staying at a particular hotel," or "I am moving to another location," "I am going back to my home," so on and so forth. And then a little bit of space for a few extra words, "love from Deborah," or, similar, just to personalize the message a little more. Then that goes to what they call a digitizer. And the digitizer doesn't have to be a radio operator. They can be anybody that can type. So they enter the information offline, away from the radio station, into the form. Then the form is moved to the radio operator. So the radio operator basically gets a memory stick with a whole bunch of messages on it, and all they have to do is import the forms, the completed forms, into their copy of WinLink Express and send it. So it significantly improves the process. And there is a parsing, again, as Jim noted. If you have an email address, it's just WinLink, goes directly to the addressee. If it's a cell phone with carrier, same thing, WinLink to the cell phone. And if any of those are missing, then so they have a mailing address, it could be minus a zip code, we at least need the state and town, preferably. That then goes to what we call a liaison from the WinLink system to the traffic network. The liaisons basically monitor on a regional basis any traffic coming into that region, and then it gets assigned depending on where it's going. So if it came into Maine, for example, it might come to my liaison station. I can then take it to the SSB net that meets daily. I can deliver the message myself. If there's an email, if there's a cell phone number, I can check to see if there is if they can receive the text message and send it that way, so on and so forth. So it gives a lot of flexibility at the last mile stage. And that's it. So there's really two forms. Both of those forms are in WinLink Express. Both the top one to email the cell phone SMS type message. That's the quick welfare message form. And then it's the welfare radiogram. It's going by radiogram. And that latter form is basically a radiogram form that's optimized uh, for welfare messages. So, and the question of, I'm not familiar with the term traffic handlers, that's basically a person that handles radiograms. So they move them from one point to another through a system of nets. And you might want to elaborate on that further, Jim, but if there are any questions, I'll take them now.
Okay.
Yes, back to you, Jim.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so again, the idea here is, you don't want to be, you don't want to be insular in your solutions. If you take a look at the I am safe process, when Link's involved, we're involved, the local organizations involved, and our goal is to provide the best service and the best options. So I've kind of said that if you were to ask me to define the job of emergency coordinator or RACES officer or the like, I would describe him as an emergency communications resource manager. And his job is to apply the best emergency communications tool for the emergency management function at hand. So in a sense, every communications tool has advantages and disadvantages, and each emergency management function has unique requirements. And his job as a resource manager is to pair the best communications modality and network and tool, you might say, to the correct emergency management function. And that's what we're doing here, is we're offering, and not just one solution, but based on circumstance, we are offering what you might call multiple solutions. And same thing here, radiogram versus radiogram ICS 213, two different functions, but the general way in which messages propagate through the system is very similar. So again, identify problems, kind of take an applications engineering approach to solving them, recognize the realities of your environment, okay, and then develop a suitable set of procedures, policies, or technological solutions, and then thoroughly test them. And that's the idea here. I left off there when we went back to Steve. Another thing that we found, when early on, back in 2015, when FEMA first asked NTS to participate in the Cascadia Rising exercise, was the rather grim reality that nobody had ever created a national response plan for a communications emergency. So in advance of Cascadia Rising, we developed a prototype national response plan. And then we also created a parallel evaluation process to test it. And we learned many things from that process. But you cannot have a proper emergency management exercise is predicated on metrics, okay? Because you have to have, let's call it, you have to seek objective truth or objective reality. So if you don't have a exercise that's realistic, attainable, and measurable, you are not going to get the truth of whether or not policies, procedures, methods, and systems work. So for you to have an emergency exercise, you have to predicate that emergency exercise on a plan, be that your local emergency action guidelines or your national response plan or whatever the case might be. So after we formed RRI, we created a national response plan that would define in general but flexible terms how we would respond to a significant communications emergency. And this plan is in the process of update now because we've developed additional new programs. But you can look at the older version, I think, which dates from 2018 or 19. That's on our webpage. But it's very similar to the process for any set of emergency action guidelines. We define roles, responsibilities, the procedures for defining connect and download frequencies for traffic exchange, SysOp, monitoring, what nets are activated, whether or not special point-to-point circuits are established, whether or not special priority entry point frequencies are established for priority and emergency traffic. And then, of course, we test the exercise through, or the plan through various exercises. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the neighborhood ham watch program. We covered this in prior presentations, but suffice to say that traditionally, what RRIs and various other MCOM groups have done is they've engaged in a process that one might call shadowing. So you have an organization like the Red Cross, or say a urban search and rescue team or whatever, and radio amateurs would be assigned to shadow key individuals in those organizations. And it's a very inefficient use of resources. So RRI adopted the Neighborhood Ham Watch program. In some areas, they call this Neighborhood Radio Watch. But essentially, the way it works is that RRI and the local MCOM group essentially train VOADs, volunteer organizations active in disaster response. We train these VOADs in basic communications protocols and procedures, basic message formatting and transmission, etc. And then we help them build out their own radio network, usually around GMRS assets. This allows them to build their own reliable communications resource. And then they can be equipped with their own radios, and the local MCOM organization and maybe the local traffic operator or others can provide the connectivity to the EOC, the emergency services, to WinLink, to our digital traffic network, whatever the case might be. And the idea is that it's a force multiplier, right? Now you only need a couple of radio amateurs to support a VOAD instead of maybe 10 or 12. And they can handle much of their own internal communications without having to use up a significant portion of the available circuit capacity that might be used to support, other organizations and other agencies on amateur frequencies. So this has actually grown pretty well. We have a number of these programs now that have been deployed throughout the United States, and they seem to be fairly successful. And so this is something else that we've kind of looked at. So going forward, what we've kind of again discovered is that we need to set some goals, and these are in the process of discussion. So none of this is set in concrete. But first and foremost, obviously, we still want to support NTS. Whatever programs, procedures, and so forth, we don't want to do any harm to NTS. We don't want to diminish it. We will continue to provide infrastructure for NTS nets with minimal conditions to the extent possible. We'll provide a transparent and supportive process for supporting those existing nets. However, in the process of doing so, we are going to protect our programs from political interference. And we are going to, as to the greatest extent possible, distance ourselves from problematic politics and so on. And then we found the easiest way to do that is to be positive, to be constructive, and to seek partner organizations that believe in the same goals and the same philosophy. We want to be a partner in the not just recruiting new operators into the RRI system, but into amateur radio in general, right? And we believe there's a lot of individuals who may have an interest in the amateur radio service that are not being reached due to the lack of visibility, the lack of efficient media outreach, public relations and so forth on the part of some of our national level organizations. So we want to maybe not just recruit people into RRI from, say the existing group of amateur radio operators, but we want to maybe even look outside the amateur radio service to bring people in. And that would benefit not just RRI, but also the local MCOM organizations, radio clubs, etc. And one really good way to do this is through these neighborhood ham watch and national SOS radio network programs that we operate. So that's kind of some of our goals going forward. Now, in terms of some of our immediate targets that we need to address is one, we really do want to finally solve the spam or bulk traffic problem. So these are some policies we're considering. They have not achieved board approval, but they may be forthcoming in one form or another. But at one point, we had tried to create a bulk traffic coordination process, but because of the schism within the traffic system and some of the politics, we really couldn't get buy-in from everybody, and it didn't work very well. So some possible solutions involve simply refusing bulk traffic from those that don't participate in the coordination process. So there would be a whitelist process, you might say. If an originator participates in the coordination process, he's on the whitelist, his traffic is handled. Maybe bulk traffic has a unique precedence of its own. And if he isn't whitelisted because he refuses to participate, the traffic is refused and serviced back. So that's one possible thing that we could consider. So essentially create a new precedence for bulk traffic, whereas routine traffic would apply to genuine individual radiograms. Okay. And then we would work on the definition for exactly how that would be described. It would be any radiogram where the originator is known in advance to the addressee, essentially. Obviously, we need to solve the problem of having sufficient outlets for messages. In doing so, we have two problems to solve, one of which is not just recruiting, but also quality of service delivery. And so we're looking at ways that we can leverage our group of registered radio operators to essentially serve as kind of a representative at the state and local level to the RRI registered radio operator would kind of be given the responsibility of building a network of known, reliable traffic handlers in his local or state area. The people he knows that are going to follow the correct procedures, deliver the messages correctly, utilize the proper forms for radiogram ICS 213 messages, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd ideally like to expand the cadre of registered radio operators to support maybe a process of this nature. So it wouldn't exclude NTS necessarily, but it would ensure quality control for routine, priority, or emergency messages that might pass through the system. And again, these are possibilities that we're discussing. We really need to look at the fact that there are some very dysfunctional traffic networks within the old NTS system. There's some states that basically refuse to handle any traffic they don't approve of. They're kind of an island. And if you're going to commit to providing, say, health and welfare messaging or emergency communication support, you have to deal with those black holes. And we believe that the registered radio operator concept may be a good solution to bypassing the black holes, particularly for genuine routine, priority, and emergency communications traffic. We also want to build better relationships with MCOM groups. We want to develop interoperability, liaison, message transfer, etc., with MCOM groups, either for messages leaving were coming into a local area. And the MOA we just developed with Oxcom USA is kind of predicated on developing that concept. And obviously, we want to continue to build out our digital traffic network to ensure greater resiliency and better performance under all propagation conditions. One of the things that we learned in Cascadia Rising was that our DTN needs to be somewhat more robust to manage variable propagation conditions. And so that's going to be a big priority for us going forward. So those are some things that we're working on currently and trying to solve. And so again, the reality, if we want to support new and innovative programs, we have to honestly assess and identify systemic problems and develop solutions to doing so. And these are just some ideas that we're talking about. They may come out totally different at the other end of the pipeline. We're going to hold some national level meetings with our registered radio operators here right after the first of the year. And we're going to seek their input as stakeholders so they have buy-in and their opinions are respected and they can address some of these potential problems, right? And again, the idea here might be even to go as far as have a bilateral traffic system where we have NTS and then we have within NTS or parallel to NTS, our network of RROs, and maybe even a process where traffic of a given priority or precedence can be routed directly to a registered radio operator who we know is properly trained, properly vetted, and equipped to ensure the proper service delivery, say, for example, to manage a priority message during a disaster operation. So essentially, RROs might become communication specialists held to a high standard of operating performance, whether they operate CW, voice, DTN, whatever the case might be. So these are all some things that we're talking about. And again, they're in response to long time intractable problems in the old NTS. And they're also, unfortunately, in response to the need to somewhat isolate RRI and our programs from this dysfunctional environment that occasionally arises out of Newington. So what will RRI look like in the end? Well, I can't really tell you that, but what a vision might be, a very flexible network consisting of not just traffic handlers and NTS operators, but also highly qualified registered radio operators. The ability, if necessary, to operate what you might call a VPN around this core of highly skilled, highly competent registered radio operators, particularly in time of emergency. An effective team. We want to be able to respond efficiently to any type of disaster that might occur, except maybe the apocalypse, I don't know. We want to be interoperable with other public service communications entities. We want to be non-political. We want to be capable of dynamically evolving with technology and time. And we want to, perhaps most importantly, genuinely respect the time invested by our volunteers. They're the people that make this work. And we owe them that respect of their time and effort. And the way we express it, I think, is through professionalism and efficiency and creating an organization they can take great pride in. And a good organization, a professional organization, is almost by definition collaborative, collegial, and it respects the stakeholder. It's grassroots oriented. So that might be kind of a philosophical view of what the future of RRI might look like. So basically, again, these were just some ideas, and it gives you a snapshot of the present reality, how we might go forward, and ultimately our future course, our route to the future is going to be defined by our member nets and our registered radio operators. So with that, I guess it's time for questions and the like. Does I guess, are you the moderator here,
I'll pick it up.
Dan? Yep.
Have you, there you lowered your screen. There's a lot of questions in chat. Some of them are just nitpicky. Now there's a real life questions there. Steve, oh, you got Steve as the backup there. Steve, why don't you go through and look at those questions and see what you can pick out in chat. And meanwhile, I'll look for some hands up for people who want to come online. Anybody want to come online here?
Well, I can answer some of these directly, I think. So somebody asked, why is it necessary to put an ICS form into a radiogram shell? So the easiest way to answer that question is the fact that a radiogram essentially is no different than an ICS 213. As a matter of fact, they're identical, other than perhaps the sequence of information that they contain, except that the radiogram has appended to it what's called network management data. Okay. And so this data defines certain things. For example, it references a message serial number at the station of origin, which is useful in routing service messages and replies from either an operator within the network or from a served agency that that appears in the address of the radiogram. So message serial number, station of origin, identifies the station that's present on the network. So in that respect, it defines a portion of network topology. The place of origin defines location of the agency or individual that signs the message. And of course, the date time group defines the temporal context of the information in the message. So as we mentioned in some of our training programs, as just a simple example, imagine that you're in an EOC and you have a major mass casualty incident. And one of the very important pieces of information that's required at the public safety answering point is the capacity at various trauma centers and emergency rooms around a city. If you're getting messages from these trauma centers with their, say every 15 or 20 minutes with their capacity, the time at which that information was reported is important. If they don't come in the correct sequence, in the correct temporal context, you may send victims to a trauma center that doesn't have the sufficient capacity because maybe a message that was transmitted later arrived sooner, vice versa. So temporal context is important. Network topology is important. How to route message replies is important. And this is all information that appears in the preamble of the radiogram, okay? And so that's why what you might call the wrapper is important in a radiogram. It's no different than an email. If you go back to the early days of the internet, they used to show the whole header in the email. You may remember that. That's because even emails append network management data. It's no different than the radiogram. Okay, so I hope that answers that question.
Okay, I might ask you if you're on a laptop, pull your monitor, towards you a little bit. There you go. You were chopping down all we can see with eyeballs.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry because I can't see my own reflection here.
That's okay. Dan, you got your hand up. Go ahead and take it. Mr. Dan.
Well, hello. Yeah, hello. Hello, James.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. Happy holidays. Couple of things. How do I say it? Oxcom USA is completely different than Oxcom. And I don't know what I heard when you were talking about doing something with Mars. But having spent several years doing Mars, handling Mars traffic, I have a hard time imagining what you could be doing with Mars. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit, I'd appreciate it.
I can take the Mars question.
Okay, well,
thank you, Steve.
There first, Steve. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, how do I say it? Everybody has a lot of good intent, and the amateur radio service is highest value is to the local communities that they live in. And, elaborating on that, it just seems like it's going to be forever frustrating and maybe counterproductive in terms of actually supporting the authorities that are actually handling the emergency and the emergency communication. You were just talking about hospital designations, apparently, for the transport after a mass casualty incident. There's an entire emergency service function set up in NIMS via FEMA. I think Health and Human Services is the national organization that dictates how that stuff is done using government money. And you got, it seems to me that there's some problems in orienting what we can do as amateurs and aligning it with what the local communities will get the best bang for the buck, which is nothing. Because
Dan, let me stop you for just a minute. Because I think we're kind of digressing into an area I didn't intend. First, number one, I clearly stated in all these past programs, and this hasn't changed, we are not in the local MCOM business. Okay, that's not our job. We don't have any interest in becoming part of the local MCOM business. We're an infrastructure provider. Okay, we're the phone company. Okay, so as far as the hospital thing, I use that as an example of why network management data is important. Okay, it's not enough to send a text. If you are in an emergency operations center, the time at which a message was drafted and tendered for origination is very important to the emergency operation. And I gave just what you might call a hypothetical situation that circumstances change with time and events evolve with time. So that was a justification for having network management data appended to a message. We're not involved in how hospitals are managed, but it was purely an illustration. Yeah, so it's the job of the local MCOM group to make sure they fit into their NIMS program, that they interface properly with their local emergency management agency. It's our job, if they hand us a message, to make sure it gets to its destination intact. And if they have special requirements for certain types of messages, we will do our best to accommodate them. And that's the point that I was making.
Thank you. I might point out there's a lot of emotion in some of these questions here, and we need to keep the emotion out. But this is factual. This is they're here for the right reasons. We all need to be also. Steve, you said you wanted to address the Mars. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I apologize. I cannot get my camera to work either. So, and at least the mic is working. Yeah, the Mars program started, let's see, what did I say, about 2.5, 3 years ago. And what it was a way of getting local information to Region 2 Mars. And it just turned out that we partnered with Region 2 for, I can't even remember the reason, even though we were in Region 1. But so they would ask for basically ground truth information with regard to various things. It would be very much like Skywarn for the National Weather Service. So the initial form of this for the past couple of years has been, what is the condition of whatever? And then you'd report back that to Mars Region 2, whoever sent the message. And the way that they've been working it is that the request for information will go through in their format in an encrypted form, and then by the sending operator will get translated into plain English and then sent over the ham band. We're moving to a process where they will send out the request for information in the script format that is what is used. So basically it's a slash separated spreadsheet format that asks for very specific information on various topics with very specific answers required so that those can be automatically entered into their program, generate a spreadsheet, then they can analyze the data. So that's going to be what we're doing in 2024. And this is all in concert with the director of Region 2 Mars, Ron Tomo. Did that answer the question?
Dan, did I help you with your question?
Not really, just to be honest.
Okay, well, we don't have all night, so let's move on to some of these others. Somebody said here, Chris, AB3WG, great. The problem is that you guys chose to leave the plantation, so the ARRL doesn't want to deal with you. Well, Chris, I'm going to respond to that. Okay. I was very active in the ARRL for 40 years. I was a section traffic manager, a section emergency coordinator, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is the ARRL left the traffic handling NTS plantation long before we did. They zero funded NTS. They ignored it in QST. They essentially did nothing to promote the program. They essentially abrogated it. The various emergency communications and field services committees abrogated it. At one point, they made the position of STM optional. They did nothing to promote NTS for 30 years, maybe longer. When NTS leadership, legitimate leadership of NTS, with the permission of the CEO of the ARRL, worked with FEMA. Apparently, the fact that the league had abrogated the NTS for 30 years became an embarrassment when NTS succeeded at the tasks they were assigned. So their response was to not just decapitate the national leadership of NTS, essentially, by changing the terms of reference. But they also issued a scurrilous press release that targeted Joe Ames, the chairman of the NTS Eastern area. So my argument would be that we didn't leave the plantation, the ARRL did. And so I'm going to say this as well, okay, as long as we're going to use terms like plantation and so forth, okay, which are somewhat pejorative. From the very beginning, RRI has done everything it can to promote the ARRL, to speak well of it, to promote NTS, okay? Our every single action has been measured to be honorable and constructive, okay? And so that's my answer to that, unequivocally, okay? So that's my response to that one.
James, I might jump in here for a moment. What James is saying is absolutely true. It's known history. Those that don't know about the history with the ARRL and NTS and how RRI came about in the beginning, you need to get caught up on that. You might answer some of your own questions on that regards. Okay, you go ahead. Well, we got some hands up here. Let's pick on one here. Gene, go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. It's very interesting presentation. Well addressed. Seems like this is kind of like I could be mistaken, but just a national message transfer system. What about if there is a need to transfer messages or get messages out internationally? Give you an example from, let's say, California to Scotland or Germany, just to name a couple. How would it work, or can it work at an international level?
Well, that work on our digital traffic net backbone. So essentially, there is actually a set of procedures and policies for transmitting messages to Europe. So we actually have DTN, RRI DTN operators in England and Germany and so forth. So that's it. Basically be just like any radiogram. It would be transferred to DTN. It would go via DTN to, say, for example, Germany, and then it would be delivered by, for example, DL4FN or a traffic operator in Germany. So that's all there is to it.
Okay. Okay, would that be okay? That would be just digital, no satellite, no
HF. Yeah,
HF type of communications.
Yeah, Pactor. It's a modified hybrid mesh network based
Okay.
on the BPQ32 software platform and automatic message forwarding via Pactor 3 right now. So the backbone operates at Pactor 3.
All right. Thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you. Go
yeah.
ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, Steve. I don't mean Steve. Go ahead there, Jim.
Okay. Do you offer the I am safe as a service to the ComL or agency that is managing the disaster? Are you there on your own? We're not there at all. Okay. Again, I need to stress something here. Okay. The Seattle organization, it's their job to interface with their emergency management agency and their emergency services. Think of us as an alternative to the phone company. Okay. If I'm the emergency management director in, say, Potawatomi County, Iowa, and I need to call the emergency management director in Omaha, assuming the phones are working, I pick up the phone, okay, and I call them on the telephone, and I say, hey, we have a problem over here, let's deal with this. The phone company doesn't care. It doesn't care what that message is. We're not in the local MCOM business. But if you need to get a message from point A to point B, we're just essentially a transparent infrastructure to provide that, right? That's all we are. Somebody asked, they said he's never heard of traffic handlers. Well, you don't really need to hear about traffic handlers. They don't really even need to be part of the let's call it the government OXCOM organization, at the local level. They're simply there to take a message, enter it into a network, and we're there to make sure it gets to its destination in a timely manner and that it's delivered. So think of us as an infrastructure, not unlike WinLink, right? I mean, WinLink does not deploy people to the local area, right? Now, it's not the job of the WinLink team. The WinLink network is just an infrastructure. That's all we are. We're an infrastructure of networks that involve section NTS nets, region nets, digital traffic networks, some RRI networks. We're kind of this seamless, interoperable network that you can basically put a message on one end, addressed to a certain destination, and it comes out the other end. That's all it is. So.
Okay. It caught me with a mouthful. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Peter, go ahead. Got your hand raised up. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So through the discussion, you've kind of clarified what the digital traffic network is versus WinLink. I didn't think that was very well described at the outset. But my question is, as a emergency coordinator in a county in California, if I have a regional emergency and all of a sudden have the need to send messages, how do I get access?
Oh, that's very
Who do
easy.
I call? Where's the phone book that gives me access to the phone system?
Sure. So basically, you would have to either yourself or maybe if a guy specializes in the digital networks within your group or your EOC, you can register as a digital traffic station. and then essentially you're whitelisted to access the network. And then we would work with you, our digital manager would work with you to set everything up. And essentially that's how it works. So it's a lot like WinLink. You have to register, right? And then once you're registered, you can access WinLink. Ours works basically the same way. The differences between us and WinLink, obviously, we're not designed to interface necessarily with email, right? We're designed to basically take a message from point A to point B. Somewhere at the end of that process, there's a human being, and then the human being deals with the message. That has pros and cons, right? The pro is that usually, if you give me a priority message, I'll make sure that message is delivered. If you stick it in a priority message in my email inbox, I may miss it, right? So sometimes there's advantages to that human interface. Furthermore, let's imagine sometimes we simplify the process of communication. So the last mile environment, particularly for medium and long haul communications, isn't necessarily known. So for example, if the emergency management director is not in his office, or a functional representative or some type of disaster official isn't in his office or doesn't have access to email, that message may need to be transferred to a public safety channel to get to him. There's all kinds of different ways in which messages pass. Sometimes humans are a little bit better at dealing with that, right? It's like in the I am safe example. If all you have is a phone number and a city and a name, it's probably better to have a human deal with that. Worst case scenario, you get in your car and you drive to the address and you knock on the door and you deliver the message. So we don't claim to be, we're not a competitor to WinLink by any stretch of the imagination. We offer a different type of service. But to be accessible to it, you simply have to register as a digital traffic station. The same tools that you use to access WinLink, you can use to access DTN. Well, you can access it with Vera, Pactor 1, Pactor 2, Pactor 3, maybe eventually Pactor 4. So it's accessible to anybody who's already on WinLink. And one of the advantages of this, by the way, is we can transmit batch files. So instead of treating it as an email where you type in an email and so forth, which is very convenient. But like in a health and welfare origination where you might have 100 messages to go out, you can transmit them as a batch file and upload them to DTN. Then DTN will automatically parse them and route them to their destination. So it is a bit different system, but it's basically a hybrid mesh network.
So the access right now is if I go to the your website, there's some information on there as to how I would sign up.
Right. Yeah. Or just drop me an email and I'll hook you up with the right guy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
To the audience here, I might comment that these folks are another tool. We have lots of tools in the amateur tool bag to do our jobs. These folks are another very good tool. And so go in the chat, look at that email, website reference there, and check them out further. Steve, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. I'm sitting here scratching my head thinking what Dan Sohn might be thinking. And that is, WinLink is used properly and improperly everywhere. And regardless of service, when it's used properly during a real life emergency, it's spawned by and brought up by and used by an authority having jurisdiction that's responsible for a formal incident command. It's not used properly when it's self-deployed during a real life emergency. In addition, when you think about part 97.221 B, which I'll give example, 40 meters, there's 5 kilohertz where automatic operation is allowed. Each station is either going to use 2.4 or 2.75 kilohertz. And during an emergency, there would be such a jam up if an automatic control took place that finding a radio message server would be almost an impossibility, which is why the government has provided WinLink on non-amateur services. My question is for this group who apparently considers themselves a transport layer, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And I realize there's more than WinLink or BPQ to WinLink operation, that they also can use any mode that's desirable. My question is, though, who spawns the transport layer officially? I'm trying to figure out how the RRI or the NTS 2.0 or any other self-deployed organization would find itself in a service without being spawned by an authority having jurisdiction that's in charge of a specific area or jurisdiction. That's my problem with all of this. Other than that, I think it's a great training ground for providing volunteer resources to authorities having jurisdiction that are in charge of these casualty events, both large and small. That's all I have.
Okay, Steve. Well, let me respond to that. You know, the same rules apply for us, right? We don't deploy. Okay, we don't deploy to disaster areas.
Understood.
Right. I mean, so let's say your Oxcom personnel, they theoretically access one of our networks to originate message traffic, the same way they might utilize WinLink. So we don't operate outside of the system like WinLink. We're a transport layer, like you said, and we have unique capabilities. One of the things I think to keep in mind here is that I can walk into any amateur radio station in the world and it has a microphone. It has a Morse key maybe. Not every amateur station in the world is equipped with for WinLink. Maybe it'd be nice if they were. Maybe it'd be counterproductive. But one of the things that NTS offers is this kind of interoperability across modes. It has these common denominator resources. Probably radio telephone communications is still one of the classic common denominators. So, for example, during Hurricane Maria, those 2,000 plus messages that were handled, out of Puerto Rico were done using voice communications. Why? Because two individuals who set up the communications thing didn't have WinLink. They just had a standard HF transceiver and a microphone. So that's what was used. It's not a hard job.
I could see health and welfare being a primary purpose here, where in a disaster area where the carriers turn the trunking around to outgoing, and you get that fast busy, all circuits are busy. I can see where that's a whole different story. I'm talking about when we talk about emergency communication. I'm talking about a formal incident where the government at every level or whatever level is necessary is involved, not handling people and perhaps in a church or a shelter to contact their loved ones. That's not what I call emergency services. That's a health and welfare situation. There, I'm happy. Where I've come apart, where the gap is for me, with what I have done and what I know, is that all communication, regardless of whether it's the telephone or whether it's a P25 trunking or whether it's WinLink or whatever it is, NTS, whatever it is, all communication is spawned by an incident command in a formal process, which is frankly the only time I've ever seen various levels of government get along with each other. And it's a process that works. And my question is, where in that process do you see yourselves fitting in, or do you have any examples of where that has worked? Do you have, is that in an AAR somewhere where the person that asked about traffic handling was Matthew McMahon, who is evaluates HSEEP exercises for the federal government, and I think he was that was a tongue-in-cheek question, but it's a real question. When does an agency allow the reformatting of a 213 message to put into a radiogram? And when you hand it to an agency, you probably just hand them the information in a free form or 213 or whatever, because as you know, that information is expected in a certain format that's set in stone, whether it be plain language or the 213. That's up to the particular receiving agency and transmitting agencies. But anyway, that's just where I was coming from, and I think that I might have covered what Dan Sohn was concerned about. There was just something missing there, and I think the word is self-deployment. It doesn't mean that you're self-deploying in a local agency. It means that you're offering a service, and if somebody wants to use it, you're there to use the service. But again, that service has to be spawned, really has to be spawned by an authority having jurisdiction that's in charge of the command, whether it's a local fire in a city block, or whether it's an entire region or two regions. It's the same process. Thank you.
Right. No, I agree with you on that. The number one, we don't go chasing agency business. Okay. But if we were asked to perform the service, obviously we would do our best to provide it.
Right.
And let's be really honest. You know, the reality is that if you take a sample of the RRIs or MCOM groups around the United States, many of them are not qualified to handle critical agency traffic.
Well, what I do when I have one group in a community where you've got more than one group, whether it's the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club, RRIs, ACS, NTS, RRI, doesn't matter. And a public servant can't make a choice like that. So what does he do? He forms his own reserve program and manages those people directly, and they can belong to anything they want to belong to. That's how I see it working successfully. Otherwise, there's always conflict.
Right. And again, we don't want to get into the local MCOM business. It's just it's not of interest to us.
Okay. All right.
The reality is if an EC somewhere or a ComL or whomever says, well, this is the only resource available to us, we'll do our best to support them. But, there's lots of options, everything from, Starlink or whatever, the Starlink to, Inmarsat to who knows what these days, right?
Right.
We're not here to, get into the weeds of how the local MCOM organization works with its agencies. Right. Who's not here to do that?
Well, that permeates all the way up the chain to the problems between NTS and RRI. It doesn't matter where it is. That same problem exists. So if I was going to use an NTS organization, I would form my own reserve and pick what I could get the best of both. So in other words, as a public servant, NTS might have they might have somebody in my community who has a son who's on the 911 commission, and somebody on RRI might have an uncle who's on the county commission, and I'm in trouble if I choose one or the other. So I just pick my own.
Well, no, here's the deal. We will never refuse an NTS message, and I'd like to think NTS operators wouldn't refuse a message that's originated by RRI. The idea all along is that those two would be seamless, in terms of message transfer, message exchange. But what you've said though is, remember that a local official is limited by his local boundaries. A state official is limited by his state boundaries. We have a nationwide system. So, you really
the jurisdiction is limited, but communication is not.
Right. And to be honest with you, if the situation is so bad that, you're using amateur radio for a lot of these functions, yeah, you have limited options. But, again, I can't possibly or I don't think RRI or NTS or anybody else, RRIs, can possibly address the requirements of every single agency in the United States. And, let's also not forget that not all MCOM involves formal government response. A radio amateur may find himself in his subdivision with 20, 30 neighbors who have no communications. There's nothing to prevent him from accessing the system, say, for example, in originating health and welfare traffic.
Right. I can understand that.
Or the
All right. Well, thank you very much. I don't want to take any more of your time. I just, I saw some frustration out there, and I thought I'd jump in and do my best.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think I touched some nerves, but my feeling on all of this, ultimately, I think it boils down to, to the fact that I think there's a tendency sometimes within the amateur radio service to essentially stake out territory. I used to teach a class on multiple agency response, and I developed, I think I've mentioned this before, the urination theory. So if you really want to understand how disaster response officials operate in an emergency, just watch two dogs in your neighbor's yard. The first one will go urinate on the shrub and say, "This is my territory." And then a short time thereafter, another dog will walk up and say, urinate on the same shrub and say, "That's my territory," right? That's intended to be humorous.
I'm thinking about a dog in a tire, where he chases a tire like his life depends on it. And when the car stops, he pees on the tire and walks away.
Right. Yeah, there you go. That's a pretty good one too. But the reality is that as radio amateurs, I think we need to avoid that. We need to put mission success over territorialism, power and control issues, etc. There's a tendency in people to say we want to be the one in charge. I don't care who's in charge. I only care that the mission is successful. So
I think that's what's going on with the agencies. They don't care what hat you got on. They don't care what where you're from or where you're going. If you can do the job and they've approved you. In other words, they know about you and you're part of their world. You got the job. They're trying to iron out some of this animosities we have between all the different groups and hams. That's just counterproductive.
There's a man up there named Charles who's got his hand up.
Yeah, that's what I'm calling on here. Charles, we're running short on time. Actually, we're running way over time. This has been a good conversation. Charles, go ahead.
Not a problem, Dan. Not a problem. I'll just keep this as short as I could. Having been on both sides of all these different issues, District EC for New York City and Races radio officer during 9/11 and other emergencies. I've also been in charge of our same group as an independent organization since 2003. So we don't report to the league. We will work with the league, but we don't report to them because we don't like the politics. I've been on both sides of the radio traffic handling side, NTS net manager and radio traffic handler in the 90s, and now part of the Radio Relay International group. I manage the database of all the nets, local and HF worldwide. the one thing that keeps getting to me when I hear different comments and I see them in the chat is that, first off, there are a lot of people that are on this call and other calls that I've been on who are 20, 30 years older than me. They've been hams for almost as long as I've been alive, yet they seem to forget that the whole idea of amateur radio is that we communicate. Let's communicate with each other. Who cares about the hats? Who cares about the organizations? Who cares about, well, you're not officially called, get out of here? No, we are to communicate. And as was just brought up by Jim, you could be communicating for people in your apartment building. You're communicators, and it doesn't matter how you do it, whether it's WinLink or whether it's Packet or Voice or CW or flashing lights, whatever it takes, you communicate because that's what you've dedicated yourself to. You're a communicator. And each of the members in the group here in New York City, I teach them, you are a communicator. You must learn how to do the best communications possible. I don't care how you do it, just get the message through. And it doesn't matter whether it's a city agency, a charity group, your local housing authority. It doesn't matter. You're there to communicate. So all this pissing on each other makes no sense whatsoever and just detracts. And we don't need that. RRI, like Jim said, is just a telephone network. He doesn't have to be deployed. He's there. While you're handling an emergency in Florida through the system, doesn't mean that at the same time there isn't some routine traffic going through the network. The network exists. I work for the post office and IT. We don't care what's in the envelope. The envelope moves. It moves where it's got to go as quickly as it can. And that's all I've got to say about that.
Okay, Charles, well said, well said. Dan, let's keep it short so we can wrap this up. Go ahead and take it.
Real short. James, when are we going to see a QNI newsletter?
Yeah, I took a little bit of a break from ham radio from about March through October. I didn't turn on any radios. I didn't do anything. I got so disillusioned and frustrated by the politics and some of the stuff that's going on. I actually considered just dropping out and leaving the hobby. But I really gave it a lot of thought. And I decided that out of respect for those that I've been working with and the effort that we put into RRI over the last 7 years, that I would stay the course and continue to work the program and not let them get me down, so to speak. But I have to admit that sometimes it's a struggle. You wonder, why, what it is about ham radio sometimes, that there's always what was Spiro Agnew? You're old enough maybe to remember Spiro Agnew, who once referred to the nattering nabobs of negativism. Is anybody here old enough to remember that? Probably back in 1970 or 1971. But yeah, Vice President Agnew, he said, he referred to the nattering nabobs of negativism. I think we have to be really careful in all of this. And as I think Charles alluded to, we are volunteers, okay? We're not soldiers, sailors, or airmen. We're not police officers. We're not, emergency services directors. We're volunteers, and we don't have to, we bring a certain set of skills and capabilities to the table. We all bring different knowledge, different networks, different activities to the table. And if somebody asks us to utilize these networks to solve a problem, we should do our best to do so. We should try to do our best to do so in a professional manner. We should try and, develop the skills needed to do so. But ultimately, we're kind of the communication service of last resort, right? And again, if I'm an emergency management director, or if I'm just the ARRIC for a county, I should use the best communications tool available for the emergency management function at hand. Okay, if I'm dispatching American Red Cross herbs around the area, maybe a 2-meter VHF voice, that's fine. If I have a point-to-point circuit with the state EOC, maybe it's WinLink, okay? Or it's, a digital circuit. If I'm collecting weather data from around the state, maybe it's a high-frequency single sideband net. I'm not here to tell anybody how to run their local program. It's just, again, remember that it's no different than any other emergency management function. People, first of all, the very concept of emergency management director, say at the county level, is kind of a misnomer, because emergency management directors generally don't direct anything. Most emergency management directors have no direct authority over the police chiefs, the fire chiefs, the DPW departments, etc. What he does do is he manages resources and he coordinates. He gets those people around a table, and hopefully he has the diplomatic and political skills to get them to agree to cooperate. And then when the shit hits the fan, pardon the expression, he is there to support them with the resources and so forth that they need to manage the fiduciary end, to manage the the coordination, and get the supplies, resources, etc., and generally facilitate a process. So this idea that if I'm not asked to help in a disaster, so be it. But if somebody comes to me, I want to do my best to solve their problem for them, and that's how we look at it. We didn't go and solicit the Seattle organization; they came and worked with us. They asked us to help them solve a problem. That's what we're here for, and that's the story.
Okay. Well, it's been a great story and a great presentation. Since the beginning to now, we went from about 40 down to 25 people watching this thing. Tells me that there are still some disgruntled people out there. You don't take a side. You do a mission. This is what I do. And so anyway, that's just me and my 2 cents. Is going to wrap this up. This has gone on longer than normal, but it's been worth it. We needed to have these kind of conversations. Are there any more comments?
Well, I want to thank James and Steve, and any and every actual ongoing continuous training for amateur radio operators is always going to be useful. And for that, I applaud RRI immensely. I thought I asked you when we were going to see another Q&A.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm going to try and put one together here probably just around the first of the year. We'll start publishing it again. We may scale back to maybe just a couple of issues a year. But yeah, it was, I needed a break from ham radio for a while.
Well, I was just going to say that your Q&A was, I think, the most looked forward to amateur radio publication in my life. So
I appreciate that.
Whatever their frequency is, I'll appreciate them.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay, one more shout out there. Any more comments, questions? This has been a good conversation. We need these things. It's awful hard when you're walking on emotional ground to keep the emotions to oneself. And there's a lot of different people, a lot of different feelings out there. I think overall, everybody walks away with this and being a winner. And with that in mind, I'm going to say 73, so everybody, and see you next week.